Hey guys, it's Kiran here, back to you with another video. And today, let's take a look at this. This is the MacBook Air M2 with a new design refresh. Apple is still selling its base M1 MacBook Air at $999, €1,230 in Italy, and selling the base M2 MacBook Air at $1,200 and €1,530 in Italy. So should you opt for the $300 premium M2 or the M1? Let's find out. The M2 does have some new color options. That's the new Midnight and the Starlight option available. Apart from that, from the outside there isn't really a big difference in the MacBook Airs. Except the new MacBook Air has a flat design like the MacBook Pros and is slightly thinner overall. This is something that never really changed until now in the Air. This is the 2017 MacBook Air with its iconic tapered finish and its illuminated Apple logo. This is the M1 MacBook Air with it. And now the M2 MacBook Air. And I actually like it because it makes the MacBook feel more portable and is also technically slightly lighter. The M2 MacBook Air weighs 1.24 kilos instead of the 1.3 kilos from the M1 MacBook Air. But the difference is marginal up to the point that I really can't tell the difference between the two. And while Apple has decided to keep the number of Thunderbolt ports to 2, they've also added a MagSafe charger, freeing up one of the Thunderbolt ports. A welcome change in my opinion. You can charge it via USB-C with speeds up to 30 watts or use the MagSafe to fast charge it with speeds up to 67 watts. One small gripe I have with the MacBook Air is that it has both of the Thunderbolt 2 ports on the left side, and it would have been nicer to have some on the right as well. But this isn't a significant problem to actually ruin my experience. Once you open the MacBook Air, which is still easy to do with just one hand, the difference between the M1 Air and the M2 Air is a bit prominent. The M2 has slightly smaller bezels incorporating an upgraded webcam within the notch. The notch isn't too distracting and you don't notice it after a while. But if you don't like the look of it, you can use an app called Top Notch to hide it. It also has an improved 1080p camera now instead of the 720p one. It's definitely better than the old one, but in a $1,300 laptop, it could still be better. Thanks to the small bezels, the screen size goes up from 13.3 inches to 13.6 inches of screen real estate. The M2 Air also has a slightly brighter display at 500 nits instead of the previous 400. The difference isn't noticeable in closed areas, but in open areas with direct sunlight, the difference is more substantial. The M2 also has slightly larger buttons on the top and a different feel to the keyboard. The Touch ID is now bigger. The speakers in the M2 MacBook Air are now relocated from the sides to the hinge above the keyboard. The M2 Air speakers are 3D surround sound, while the M1 Air speakers are stereo. But honestly, both the M1 and the M2 MacBook Air have fantastic speakers for great video consumption, and they also get pretty loud. I really thought that since the M2 Air speakers reflect the sound from the screen, it would be worse than the M1 Air speakers, which fires upwards. But I can't really tell the difference between them unless you put them side by side. And comparing them side by side, I think the M2 Air even sounds slightly better than the M1 Air speakers. The M2 Air also feels nicer to close, partly thanks to its new design. It is more dampened than the M1 Air. And now let's talk about performance. The Apple Silicon is the main differentiating factor between these two. For normal usage, they both perform great and you can't really tell the difference between them. But if you do some videos or photo editing or anything intensive really, that's where the M2 shines. It is up to 15 to 20% faster, especially in optimized apps like Final Cut Pro or Pixelmator Pro. Now both the Air models are fanless, so they do thermal throttle slightly in the long run. But for quick exports they are both great. But I would consider the MacBook Pro if you want to work on intensive loads for prolonged periods of time, thanks to its fans which can eliminate the thermal throttling problems. And for benchmarks I used Geekbench, BrowserBench and Cinebench to check for thermals during 10-minute runs. In Geekbench CPU tests, as you can see, the M2 performs 10% better in single core and almost 15% better in multi-core tests. And in Geekbench compute results with OpenCL and Metal, the M2 is 33% faster on OpenCL and almost 44% faster in metal than the M1. And now let's test them in Cinebench, and since the test runs for 10 minutes, we can see when they throttle and how hot they get. Here, thanks to thermal throttling, the difference between the M1 and the M2 are closer than ever. In the single core test, the M2 performed only 6% better than the M1, while in the multi-core test, the difference was almost 27%. But this being said, the M2 does run much cooler than the M1. During the test, the M1 MacBook Air went up to 99 degrees Celsius, while the M2 MacBook Air went only up to 78 degrees Celsius. And another thing to keep in mind while getting the M2 Air is the amount of RAM and storage configuration you get. Because the base 256 gigs version, which has a single SSD module instead of two small ones, is significantly slower than the rest of the lineup. Meaning if you have the base 8 gig RAM and 256 gig storage version and use the swap memory, it can cause significant slowdown since the SSD is as fast. But for most users just browsing, the M2 delivers great performance even with a lot of tabs open. The battery life is pretty similar to the M1 MacBook Air. I get slightly more than an entire day with just web browsing and consuming content. But I would still give a point to the M2 MacBook Air here since it can charge faster. So is the M2 MacBook Air a great buy? And more importantly, is it worth the $300 premium over the M1 MacBook Air? Maybe. For most users just using the MacBook as a media consumption device, with the occasional photos or video editing, the M1 MacBook Air is the better buy. And for those that really need the extra performance, you should probably opt for the MacBook Pro. So the M2 MacBook Air really kind of falls in a niche category. Those who want slightly better performance but don't want to pay the $100 premium for the MacBook Pro, the M2 MacBook Air is for you. And as a bonus, you get a slightly upgraded webcam if you want to use it for online classes or work from home. So that is my review of the M2 MacBook Air. I hope you guys like this video, and as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.